Have you ever wondered what it is about reaching for our dreams that feels so hard and requires so much of our own healing? Are you curious about how moving towards your own creativity might heal what's making you feel stuck? Well, that is why we made this show. I'll be having conversations with emotional health experts as well as artists, musicians, and creatives, all with the intention of resourcing and inspiring you to uncover your true creative self. I'm Courtney Lancaster, and this is the Heal Create Podcast. Welcome to another episode of the Heal Create Podcast. I'm so glad you're here, and we have somebody really special that I'm really excited to talk to today. Welcome my friend, Andrew Heiligenthal.
Hello. Oh my gosh.
Hello.
It's so good to be with you.
I'm so happy you're here. I've been thinking about this conversation a lot, more probably than a lot of the topics that we've covered, because it's sort of the crux of what I'm here to do, and also because your story is so special and powerful, and I'm so excited to get into it. So welcome. How are you, sir?
Thank you. I'm doing good. It's kind of cold outside sometimes, and so that feels really nice to me. Like
in the winter?
Yeah, I grew up in the Midwest, right? So like after being in California for so long, I was like, something is wrong. There's like half the seasons that they're supposed to be. So like it's cold, and that feels good to me. So I'm but not like 12 feet of snow. So that's really good.
Right. Yes, that is nice. I have a lot of friends in Nashville actually that are just like feeling the same way. It's kind of like a drawn out, dreary vibe, right?
Yes. I think the winter is like pretty moderate. You get a little snow. It's gone in a couple of days. They cancel school for like not really any reason, which is super cool. Right. But the biggest win is that there is like fall is back, and like I need fall in my life. Yeah. And so that is an enormous upgrade.
Yes, absolutely. I don't know that we ever actually met in person, but we were in the same city for a while in Northern California in Redding. And just speaking of fall, that was the first place that I ever experienced fall, because I personally grew up in Palm Springs, California until I was 33 and moved to Redding. So all I had known was eternal summer.
Wow.
All year long.
I wish there's something I could do to help, because that just feels so wrong.
Yeah, it was. It was like, I think they averaged like 4 days of rain a year. And it was sunny all the time, but it got up to like 120 for, a good few months out of the year. So anyways, Redding was like a whole different situation for me with the leaves and the snow and the rain. And it was crazy. But it's crazy. That's our connection, is meeting, or at least knowing that. Yeah, we connected through Redding.
Absolutely.
I'm trying to think of how we even got talking or connected about life coaching, the topic of life coaching.
I think we have a mutual friend that kind of got us connected.
Oh, that's right. Mm-hmm.
Yes. So cool. But the thing is, and I don't actually know if we've talked about this before, I know your name from many mutual friends. So it's like, like one of those connections where you're like, okay, I know your name, and then I've heard so many good things from so many different places, and then when the opportunity arose to actually like have a one-to-one connection, I was like, oh, absolutely, like 100%. So yes,
thank you. Yeah, and same, and our first conversation was like a 2-hour deep dive into nervous system work and life coaching and life philosophy and.
Totally. I'm still unpacking some of the philosophical implications. 100%. I'm so stoked about it.
Yeah, because I think we talked about polyvagal theory. We talked about the nervous system, which is something I've explained on this podcast before, and something worth Googling a basic overview of, or just off the top of my head, if you're really interested in it, if anybody's listening and really interested. Deb Dana has a book called Anchored, which is a really great resource. There's also Stephen Porges, you can look into his work. But basically what it is it's understanding that your state creates your story, and that there are 3 different states that the human body can be in based on how safe it feels in any given moment. And it is our ventral state of safety. And that is when it's you on your best day or one of your good days, when you feel connected, you feel like you're in your purpose, you're in creativity, you're in flow. And that is when you can access, your preferences and your personality and who you truly are. The next state that you go into is your sympathetic state, which is your fight or flight state. And then the third state that you go into is your dorsal state, which is your state of shutdown or immobility. So that's just a little quick recap for how we kind of got connected and what that has to do with your story and some of the things that we're both mutually really interested in. And is there anything that I'm missing around that?
No, I was like, I feel like I should like do the applause like emoji thing on the platform. I'm like, it's so good. I always appreciate the way that you talk about it too, Courtney. Just like, so it was so fun in that conversation, and I come back to so many of the different like shorthand ways. I remember you had like a chart that you made and all kinds of cool stuff. Like, so yeah, it's so helpful the way that you talk about it. And then I think maybe even to your broader point, like just so critical, like to have an understanding of what it is and how the part that it plays and really the critical role and all kinds of different things. So, man, it was such a good convo, and it's such a powerful, like just framework and tool in so many respects.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. And I mean, it definitely is all things that I learned on my own healing journey. And just even coming back to that point of your state creates your story. So whatever state you're in will, that's the narrative that you'll have going through your head. And so the point of this podcast and a lot of the work that I do with clients and with myself is helping people return to a state of creativity. And sometimes that's a big journey to get back there, if we've gone through really difficult things, but creativity is the natural flow of the human that feels deeply safe and connected. And so that brings me to you. Now you do life coaching work. You work with people as well, and you're also helping them return to and navigate transition, I think, right? Isn't that one of your specialties?
Yeah, I work with a lot of folks. I mean, there's some of the like goal and dream setting, which I love to do. I get a lot of folks, I like looking back at my story, there's just been transition after transition after transition. So transition is definitely such a common one that I work with people through. And so, yeah, those are some of the main ones. I do a little bit of not in the same way that you, but kind of my approach is less trauma informed as kind of like the core, but informed more around that kind of that principle of like what's happening in your world and the kind of passive internal culture that's happening and how your attention to that or lack thereof or interaction therein like plays such a huge role. So it tries to kind of build on some of the critical ideas and bounce it out and make it useful for people that maybe are going through, transition, trying to grow personally, trying to connect better in relationship. And occasionally as well, like the creative endeavor or, small business or small ministry launch stuff. And so it's so cool. I think the interaction of those principles and how critical they are in helping us understand why we're affected by stuff the way we are, and then actually the opportunities we have to like make a difference. So I know you do the same stuff, but I'm just like, it's such a fun world to be in, and I'm stoked about it. Yeah.
Well, and everyone has their own kind of take and unique, look at that kind of work. So I feel like even therapists, will all have their own kind of thing that they're really interested in helping people do or uncover or move towards. And you said something I want to ask you about. You said you help people dream.
Yes.
Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Oh my gosh. It's like one of my favorites because I think like it's so I guess when I think about dream, I think about it fairly expansively. And I think like the work of being a human that entails like envisioning the future and picturing what things ought to be like and should be like, and we want them to be like, it's so profoundly important. And like, strangely, we don't show up to the task like, oh, great, cool. So like, I know how to do this. I know what I'm doing. I've got a bunch of reps at this. And at least I certainly didn't. Maybe I was the only one.
No, same.
But like the thing that I think is so beautiful is so much of it can be learned. And so that's kind of where the approach that I take is trying to even break that task and that act apart and talk about what are the discrete kind of parts of it and how can we grow in the ability to be in that mode and be in that state and kickstart like a radically awesome journey, no matter where that leads. So I love to unpack it. And so that's one of my very favorite creative spaces to be in. Like when you have to get your hands dirty, I'm like, like someone else is better at that. Like I really struggle. But the like just dreaming as like an intellectual act, it's absolutely so much fun.
It is so much fun. I totally agree with you. It's 100% what lights me up too, working with people. But I remember learning in my own trauma recovery that dreaming is imperative for healing. You can't heal if you can't dream. For a couple of reasons. You have to give your nervous system somewhere else to go, somewhere new to go. And so we want to titrate that sticky, hard, really heavy healing work with dreaming, with creativity, with creating the future that we want to move towards. But your dreams will always require healing, but your healing needs your dreams in order to unfold. So it's not just like a really nice thing to think about. It's like actually imperative for moving forward.
I love it. The switch from it being like an add-on, like the cherry on top, to like a necessity is like
the thing. Yeah.
Yeah. It's so important. And it's like, I don't know the whole scope for everybody, but like, I think for me, it really that was one of the first obstacles, was like, this is kind of a cherry on top. Like, it's like, if you get to it, cool. But like, there's other more important stuff. Yeah, totally. And so kind of making that connection and of like, this is necessary. And I think I tell people a lot, like, and I guess maybe I mean this a little bit tongue in cheek sometimes, but it's part of what it means to be a person, is to have stuff that you project out in the future. So at a certain level, you can't not dream. They just may not be dreams that you actually want to inhabit or like bring to life. And so, yeah, I love doing it on purpose and doing it with a lot of fun. And like you said, oh my goodness, having it be essential in a growth journey and a recovery journey, like so critical.
Yeah, absolutely. Can you tell us how you got to this point of now supporting clients?
Yeah. So I grew up in the Midwest. I'm the second of 4 siblings. I grew up in a family of teachers. So like my dad is a teacher, my mom's a teacher, my older sister's a teacher, my brother-in-law's a teacher, my younger sister's a teacher. So like everything is teaching, learning, exploring, head.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Moved to the Twin Cities, Minneapolis, St. Paul after high school and did university there. I studied like sociology and political science, which is kind of where I cut my teeth on some of the like systems approach to things, which was super actually marking for me, because I guess I don't even know exactly how I would describe a lot of my thinking before that, but everything was very like straightforward, very linear, very, curriculum oriented. And I think my time studying sociology and political science was like, oh my gosh, there's so many different dynamics that are at play, which was really the seedbed for a lot of the different things that I think I've ended up at least exploring. And I think a lot of the things that I do as a coach now. So I met my wife there. We got married. We moved to California a few years later and had this incredible adventure with a church in Northern California. And we're there for the better part of 12 years. We had our kids there. We bought our first house there, all kinds of incredible stuff. The like subplot for my journey, I think, is, I jokingly always say, like, I peaked in like middle school football. Like when I was the right tackle for the Ames middle school Gators, like I could pull for like a trap or something, like the fullback would run right down the middle. And that was really the peak of my athletic, social, and I guess hopefully not intellectual prowess, but it was definitely a high point. Like, like middle school, high school, college, I think can be really hard for anybody / everybody. I had a couple key relationships with coaches that were really, really hard. And I think I spent probably the better part of those years just absolutely kind of like internally, like a puddle on the floor of, I don't know what I do now because I can't play sports. I don't know what I do now because I don't feel comfortable making friends. And so much just discomfort and insecurity and like all of that really hard stuff. I kept trying to like, I guess I can laugh at it now because I'm like, oh, Andrew, like I just want to give you a hug and be like, you're going to be okay, buddy. Like, and your last name is so long. It's so hard for people to say, but it's going to be fine. Like, yeah, I think internally it really was a big collapse that I always tried to achieve my way out of. And it wasn't until I think in my marriage and probably even early as a dad or learning I was going to be a dad, that I was like owned that the things I wanted to see in my life, there was a significant breakdown, like, and that I didn't really know what it was. And I didn't know, I went from environment to environment to environment and kind of like coach or counselor or mentor, like to find the person that could fix the thing or give me the right tool. And it just never really kind of came together. And so when I reflect, the beautiful time in California was this incredible journey of actually figuring out, how do I tap into what it means to me be in an authentic way? How do I grow and heal and recover? And I had to learn how to be creative. Like, I'd played sports, I'd done well in school. I'd done fairly well job-wise up until that point in terms of achieving, but I'd never had to be in a creative space. And so I had to learn how to do it. And it became kind of like the springboard for basically everything that I just love and value in the world. And it led me to answer so many questions about so many breakdowns. And so for me, coaching is a place to help share that and to help cultivate that alongside other people. And I think a lot of it also stems from, so in 2019, obviously we've talked about this before, Courtney, but like my wife and I very suddenly lost our second daughter when she was just about 2. And so, so much that obviously goes into that story and that season. And boy, it'll be 4 years this coming winter. We just passed the 3rd year anniversary. And so much still unfolding from that. But as I look at so many parts of what I had to learn about creativity and what it meant to be in that space, so many of those lessons and tools and keys were critical, I think, for just walking through a season of the most immense kind of grief and difficulty that I faced personally.
Yeah, which makes so much sense. And I think it was one of the things that really struck me about talking to you, especially when I first met you, was the peace that you had seemed to make with the process of it unfolding and still moving forward in your own life. And that's just incredibly powerful and an impact that hasn't been made on me by anyone that I've talked to personally. And so when we talked about like the nervous system, and I think you caught the same way that I feel about it, which is that it's critical, is because what we really are talking about is we're talking about helping people come back to a safe place within themselves, come back to safety, which is creativity is like what happens when you feel safe. But so many people that I work with, and certainly myself in my journey, have been really stuck when you've been through something so hard with this feeling of impending doom, with this feeling of what if something terrible happens again? And it keeps people from feeling safe. It keeps people from creativity. It's what anxiety is. It's what shutdown and depression is. It's that unresolved feeling of like, what happens if something terrible happens? And I think that, I always say it's so much easier said than done, but I always say, like, when you know that you'll be okay no matter what, you're free to create. And I think just to honor you as somebody who's gone through something that is such a profound loss, what has it looked like for you to walk through that and come into safety again, or to find safety again?
Yeah. It's such a good question. Thank you for your kind words. It means a lot. I appreciate it. Yeah, gosh. I mean, I think probably the starting point is I'm like, I still don't really know, but I mean, like, I think that's some of the honest answer, I guess, 3 years in. I end up trying to, I think, kind of process and think about this a lot, obviously because it's so pertinent to me day by day and season by season. But because of our journey, I get to connect with a lot of people that are facing either something similar or have lost a loved one or some sort of kind of adversity like that. And I think one of the most critical starting points for me is grappling a bit with the reality that, like, that sense of safety, that sense of like, this is okay. In some ways, even moving back to that, like, feels unsafe, kind of like intrinsically. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And so it feels like you're like trying to look at your life from a platform that you're like, well, I don't trust that platform. Like, why would I step out? Why would I use that ladder to go up on the roof? Like, that's the ladder that I was standing on when everything fell apart. And so like, I think within that dynamic, like I had a lot of conversations in prayer. I had a lot of conversations with friends and with a counselor about what that was like. And I think I was probably brought into a gift from a lot of those people of like, that's actually like really okay to start without having that thing. Does that make sense? Like the first thing that I wanted to do was like, I wanted to make something better for my family, or I like wanted to make something better I wanted to do anything. And there's like this wrestle and kind of a breaking in a sense of like, there's actually not anything I can do. And there's moments that I absolutely hate that. There's moments that I am like, well, of course, like I'm super apathetic and depressed about it. There's moments when I'm like just broken up and sad about it. And so I don't even know this is necessarily all that insightful. I just see so many times within myself and for others where like the first thing is like, oh my gosh, this is so terrifying. I have to get out of this right away. A critical piece for me in so many ways were to have kind of people that would be with me in that space and like actually hold space for that and help give language for and point out the value of like, Andrew, even though this space is like horrible for you, like this is actually important in a way. Like it almost sounds weird to say that, but like, this is important. This is like you reconciling yourself with like, wow, I feel deeply wronged by existence itself. And I think those are the places where people, and for me over time, because it rarely happened all at once, but with like, especially in prayer with the Lord, like that moment of like the Lord wasn't like, Andrew, that's like an obstacle to moving forward. It was like, that's actually the starting place that we move from is like, yeah, that's wrong. Like that's bad. That's not okay. We don't have to get past it to get back on track. Like that's the beginning of the track to wherever we're going next.
Yeah. When you go through something like what you've been through, or like so many people that are even just resolving really awful trauma from their childhood, there's the shock phase. There's like the phase when you do just have to be nurtured and you do just have to like, it's not smart to build anything right now. You can't create. I was just listening to an interview with Steven Spielberg, and he made this movie recently called The Fabelmans, all about his childhood trauma. And he just talked about like the process that it was, that he thought he had gone through it already and he was ready to like make it into art. And he's like, it's, you know, it is true. You do work out your trauma while you're making your art, but there has to be that like season where you're just not making anything. You have to like, oh, this is what actually happened to me. Does that feel like kind of what you're saying?
Yeah,
that you had to make peace with that part?
Yeah. I mean, I think externally, like I wasn't really writing. If I'm going to go to an art form, it's probably going to be cooking or it's going to be writing. Those are probably where I'm going to go. And I didn't do a lot of that because it felt really broken and it felt really painful. I think the trick of it for me was like, there's a tremendous amount of internal building that existing requires. Like you can't stop being a human. And so you're constantly having things that you care about and don't want to care about it, or constantly trying to do creative work of like languaging how you're feeling or what you need. Like, where am I going to go today? Like making decisions. The act of being a human is inherently creative. And I think that was part of what was so painful is like, just what was required to wake up in the morning. And so it like made all the difference in the world to be able to name those things. I honestly like, that is one of the biggest things for me then. It continues to be. And with people that I work with is just being able to point at a thing. It's a creative act. It's a human act, but it's happening in your inner world. And you're asked to do it in virtue of living another day. And it's incredibly costly. And for me, with my wife and with counselors, to be able to like appropriate that, I guess is maybe the best word I can think of, and be like, wow, like daily I'm still paying a cost in a sense of like what it looks like, the price of admission for living. And I think that's a place where I pretty quickly realized like, oh, I'm going to have to find something to give that unto. Otherwise, I feel like I'm getting ripped off by the cosmos, like every moment of every day. And a guy that I love, he's like, there's times that we can't do something for ourselves, but we'll do it for others. And I think for me, there was these like jump starting things of like my kid or close friends or the kids that I want to have later on that I'm like, oh, like, or again, for me, some of it looks like my faith, right? Of like, okay, this cost of living isn't in vain. So I don't know, like for me, that becomes kind of the foundational level. And what it allowed me to do, I think, was begin to lean into both gently and slowly. And as like new growth kind of emerged and gently new drive and interest in the world kind of reemerged, like to be able to be expressive in that space and embrace authenticity that way, but also recognize there's an unavoidable effortfulness that is entailed in existence. It can't become override. Like that's not obviously going to be good, but I fool myself if I think just being expressive is like, that's what it's going to do. Cause there's times when I want to express myself and it's effort. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Oh my gosh. Yeah. I mean, I went through a long season of healing from some really profound trauma. And I remember there was a season specifically where it was that thing that you've heard people talk about, like where you can't get out of bed and you feel like everything is an effort. And I remember how badly my body wanted to shut down, which means like my body didn't know the difference between the past that had already happened and like what could potentially happen in the future. And it was just like, Courtney, the safest thing for you is to never get out of bed. And I remember I had to, in those days, I would like get up and I would have to be like, see, like, we're getting you a drink of water, body. Like, do you see, like, I'm feeding you breakfast and I'm brushing your hair and we're going to take a shower now. It was like that basic. That was the extent that I could, I mean, you could call it create. That was the extent that I could connect to myself, was like taking like very gentle care of the absolute basics, because, and it wasn't time to thrive. It wasn't time to like, you know, turn it into a message that I could share with the whole world. It was not time for that. It was like time for the basics and to help my body heal from the message that living isn't safe.
Yes, absolutely.
So much like self nurture, which is what I hear in your message as well.
Yeah. And I mean, it's the self nurture. Absolutely right. And like setting a really, like you're describing, setting like such a low, it wasn't like it was an intentional act. I would just kind of like discover something that like, I was like, oh, that was nice. Like that was okay. That felt okay. And I was like,
yes,
okay, do that. Obviously, you know, like the lake that's out there, and I would drive out a bit because especially before death, I love to be outside. And so I would kind of like revisit that, like, as like, is there anything good and nice here? And I remember like sitting by the lake and nothing was good. Nothing was good. Nothing was good. It was just like, blah, gross. And I like turned to walk back and there was like this crunching sound of the sand and kind of like rocks under my boots. And I remember like, I was so mesmerized because I was like, that's nice. And I just kind of like wandered, and the water was really low. So there's like a ton of shoreline. I just like wandered around listening to that. And like, now I know I'm like, that's a level of resourcing myself in like a really powerful way. And
yes, it is.
And I was like, I think for me, I was like, I would have never, I had someone helpfully and thankfully point that out. I would have never probably necessarily validated that as the powerful healing act. And honestly, I think probably even underneath that, the powerful creative act that it is to just happen upon something lovely and beautiful and like give it attention. And like one of my favorite authors on beauty, she says like the first act of acknowledging beauty is to stare. And like it for me, it was just like, absolutely. Like that's where it begins, is with attention, and attention that is of a quality that you kind of just spontaneously give it more. And that those are places that are creative, and those are places that are healing, and they're shockingly available and tiny so many times.
What was it? What was the quote? The first thing.
I'm not, okay. So I'm an Enneagram 5. So I wish I had it in front of me and I would read it to you properly, but it's something to the effect of like, the first act in acknowledging beauty is to stare. That's the first fruit of when we encounter beauty. and when it does its work on us is we're just kind of transfixed, almost unintentionally or pre-intentionally. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, and even in a healing journey, a big part of that is noticing what you notice. And like with the whole, neurons that fire together, wire together, so you can like increase connections in your brain, increase the awareness of patterns. Like, look how people are showing up for me, or look how abundant life is, or whatever. It could be really small. Like, look how these good things that you want to kind of teach your body and your brain to begin to look for again. And those were like the building blocks to the unfolding that I've been on. Sounds like also that you've been on as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
When you were, and I know that you said that it of course is still a process, but what are some of like the practical things besides what you've mentioned, or maybe in addition to, that you noticed, or you maybe use tools that you use to continue to move towards feeling more safe, increasing, moving towards your dreams, moving forward?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the resourcing one is really a big one. I tell people that I work with, like, you need a little beautiful habit. I think there's so often these, like, I don't know, low stakes isn't even quite the right way to say it, but like those things that are just they're very gentle, they're very normal. To me, when I'm working with people, we're kind of looking for something, and what I ended up looking for, it wasn't something that I could necessarily design or devise for myself, right? Like, I kind of needed to stumble upon something that I was like, that was nice. And like circling that bar of like, hey, nice is really valuable at this point. Like that's actually like probably the most enormous win we could possibly imagine. And so I think that's obviously super important for me. I constantly wrestled with a second thing, which is like, what's the goal right now? Like, what am I even kind of like trying to do? And so I think it's really helpful to process and dialogue and have a sense of like what you're trying to do. It's where some of the creative piece was so essential for me, of like, you really have to kind of double down on trusting yourself in the middle of that process. Like, someone else can't tell you what you need.
Yeah, totally. Well, and I think that one of the things, the mysterious element of healing, is that I think that God highlights to us specifically little things that are going to help, things that we need to kind of like a frog, lily pad to lily pad. Like, we do move forward with those little things. So Paying attention to what that might be for you.
I think that like in losing a loved one, one of the kind of terms or term sets that I kind of grapple with the loss had to do with value, and the value of a human, and what it looks like. I don't think that humans are meant to be lost in the way that I experienced and that many people experience. And I don't think the kinds of losses we experience in trauma, like that's literally it's not the plan, I guess, for lack of a better term. And so I think we're grappling with a kind of a change, a shift, a loss in some value that is actually quite incomprehensible, kind of. Does that make sense? Like, and so
absolutely. Yeah.
The idea that I'm kind of fumbling my way into something is deeply impactful for me. So like my master's is from seminary, and one of the topics that we learned in seminary is in theology. There's two different types of way of using language. One is like in the affirmative, and one is the negative. So the affirmative says God is good, God is loving, God is whatever. It's positive affirmations. And then there's the negative, which is called apophatic. And it's like saying God is not limited, God is not whatever. And for me, in my season of loss and grieving, leaning into the negative, right? Like we've kind of alluded to it, like what I didn't like, or what I know that God isn't, what I know isn't right. Like I know that it's not right that she died. I can't always say a lot more than that. That was so helpful for me. And it didn't always feel like that was valuable, because it was like negative and I should be positive and I should be getting myself going somewhere. So even just creating permission to be in that space of my negative affirmations, that actually was super, super helpful for me as well, because it like carved out a space for my person to exist separate from all of these positive affirmations that I was like, honestly, I'm not really ready to make those yet, but I can sit in the negative space for a minute and we'll see what happens. And I was willing to kind of do that. That felt safe.
Totally. Well, it's the same, I think, for people that struggle with anxiety. The things that we worry so much about actually show us what we care about so deeply. And it's one way to sort of like flip that in reverse and say, oh, wow, look how deeply you care about that. That is so connected to your purpose, so connected to the essence of who you are.
Absolutely.
It would just be more helping your brain and your body to relax more and more into the enjoyment of that thing and the connection to that thing. For you, though, going through a healing process, I remember you said something outside of this conversation. You mentioned just understanding what was happening somatically, which had you thought about that, or had you experienced that, needing that understanding of somatically, meaning in the body? Had you had to come to like an understanding of that in any other season of your life, or was this really what brought that for you?
A somatic approach in some ways. So that's less of my vernacular. So you'll have to jump in and make sure that I'm approaching it correctly. But like for me, looking back on probably before my daughter passed away, addressing points in breakdown in my life, one of the most critical missing pieces was kind of the embodied dimension, and actually taking stock of like, what are the sensations happening in my body? Where are they? What do they mean? I think it was on my radar because of that, because it absolutely transformed everything that I did. Like it became a way for like me to make sense of like, why am I thinking for an hour about the same thing? Right. And I'm like, oh, underneath all the thinking, there's a pit, like right there, like a deep, deep pit. And as soon as someone was like, hey, like, and I actually read it in the book, but they were like, what's happening in your body? And I was like, oh my gosh, this changes everything.
I had the same thing.
Because it's so obvious. Like so many questions that I've been perseverating about were just like either resolved or redirected so quickly by integrating this whole entire other aspect of who I am as a person. And so I didn't have a lot of understanding about what would take place in a grief journey or in the kind of the trauma of our loss. In working with a counselor, that was something that I had value for, and she would point to that. And it was so helpful. Like I remember her one time saying, I don't even know the technical space for it, but I was like, keep trying to do an act and get to the point of like having payoff. So like I keep trying to go for a walk and hoping that I'll get to the point 10 or 12 or 15 minutes in when it'll feel good. And it doesn't ever feel good. And this is probably 3 or 4 months in. And I remember a counselor just being like, that's part of somatically, like that's part of what's happening in your world. Like your body's kind of like not going to flip the switch to that payoff thing. And again, for me, it was just like so helpful to be like, oh, that's not a broken thing. There's a really purposeful role that's playing. I couldn't even tell you exactly what it is, but I know that I experienced it, and hearing the permission made all the difference.
And I think that's what's so beautiful to me about Jesus over and over and over again is how human he was, how he came to be in a human body, and how there's a lot of science between people who have experienced trauma. You naturally leave the body, and the head is just a safer space to be. Because the body is the scene of the crime. The body is where it happened. Like your felt sense is so intense and can be so overwhelming that a really smart protective thing that we do is we go to our head. We go to the stories that we have. The problem with that is it does disconnect us from our humanity, because our body is where we also experience connection and creativity and healing and groundedness. And I think Jesus invites us so much into that story, into that felt sense of being an actual human in an actual body. So in this way, I wonder if you feel like going through what you've been through has invited you more into your humanity.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great way of putting it. I remember a really pointed conversation. You know, I was on a prayer walk with the Lord. I was in this really beautiful, like kind of hilly, rocky area. And the journey in navigating my thoughts had kind of led me to this place. The thing that came out of me at a story level was I was like, well, boy, it sure seems like to me, God, that I care a lot more about this bodied stuff, because if it had been up to me to do something, like I would have done something about that. Like I would have changed what happened. And it was a few minutes from beyond that. It wasn't like right away, but I remember kind of just continually a little bit like God made a lot of space for me to kind of just like stick it to him, I guess, in a lot of those states and like converse.
Could have done this better.
Yeah, this would have been really great. And if you really cared about it, it probably would have looked like this. There was a ton of space to do that with the Lord, which I really appreciate on his behalf. But I remember him being like, it was kind of like, Andrew, you know, the reason that you have any value for that is because of the immeasurable value that I have for it. And I was like, interesting. Okay. Like, I'll think about that. That has not up until this point been a part of my story. You know, among all these things, the most simple but practical thing is like, you need a relationship. Like you need people or a person to kind of help go through it with you and recognize what's happening and be able to be with you in it outside of like trying to get you someplace. But the value of presence is just remarkable. I think.
It's so true. Oh yeah. It's imperative. It's called co-regulation. It's absolutely imperative for healing, even for dreaming, even for growth. It's imperative as well. Do you think that it's possible for a human to live without the fear of impending doom?
I don't know. Do you think, I mean, I'll tell you what I guess I think, but I'll tell you mine and you got to tell me yours.
Okay.
Okay. I guess I'm operating under this kind of approach where I'm like, I think there's like a primary and a secondary level to that. So I'm like, I don't know that you can live outside of the unavoidable kind of spontaneous experience of fear, anxiety, worry at that level, like, because it just happens. I think that typically where I ran into challenges or when I maybe see folks run into challenges is when that becomes like calcified in kind of their way of being themselves. And it becomes all of reality. And so, I don't think you can avoid that. Like, I think, there's instances since then when there's been a scenario that's happened in my life, some of them actually quite serious, some of them not serious at all. And I'll have, you know, a moment, like a second to a few minutes where I'm in a certain space and I'm like, oh, I know this space. This is that trauma space. This is that, like, it can be there. The key is, I guess now I know that it can be regulated and I know how it can be. And I think that element of, it goes back to, for me, the value in human dignity of like, I think we are empowered types of creatures, right? And so like, I'm not at the mercy of that. And I actually have a part to play in it, which is, again, it goes back to one of the core pieces that you say all the time, the way that your state determines your story. And I'm like, there's actually, for me in theological terms, we'll talk about it in terms of practices, and you can change your affections. This goes back centuries. Christians have said, like, you can actually shape your affections by being intentional about your practices. And I think that it's using a different language to say the same thing, which is that you actually can drive a different state, even if you start at state fear. Like, it can be different. You know what I'm saying? Absolutely.
Yes. And praise God for all the science that we have behind that being true. Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, even as I ask the question, it's a question that I've been asked from clients, and will this anxiety ever go away, basically, or like, will I ever feel safe in my body? And the answer is, I think both. I think you wouldn't want to be free from fear, because that would make you not a human.
Yes.
And that being human is incredibly, can be incredibly vulnerable, and there's so much loss. And when we disconnect ourselves from that fear, or even from the grief of loss or potential loss, we do disconnect ourselves from our humanity. And those vulnerabilities in being human are some of our best connection points to ourselves, to each other, to God. So you wouldn't really want to live without that fear. But I think I would also agree with your second point that when it becomes who you are, one of my mentors talked about being with your pain versus becoming your pain. And that's really what we're talking about. It is not possible to live without the vulnerability of being human, but it is possible to live without becoming your pain constantly to where it's who you are. or what you're constantly sucked into. It is, like you said, it is possible to regulate, which means to help yourself come back to safety over and over and over.
You wouldn't want to not have those capacities to be affected by that, which I think for me, even in a regulated state now, I'm like, oh, there's tremendous value in those emotions, in that neurological state. Like, it's doing something that is intrinsic of what it means to be a human. And literally at the very core, I think at the level of like, is it going to have this kind of intensity and this kind of overbearingness and this kind of like, I wake up and I carry this thing around all day, and then I go to sleep and I maybe forget about it for a minute until I wake up to go to the bathroom, and then I feel like I feel it again. That absolutely changes. Do you know what I'm saying? Like that
right.
The intensity, and then just like any other bodily sensation changes. Like it's not permanent in that kind of way at all, which is so, I remember our counselor just saying like, it won't feel the same in a year. She never said what it was going to feel like. And that was so freeing and permissive. Yeah,
I totally agree with that. And that makes so much sense. I wonder, do you have any encouragement, or would you have any encouragement? I know you work with people who have gone through similar things. What would your encouragement be for someone who has gone through something profound and doesn't know yet how to move forward, or how to move towards dreaming, or just move forward in their life? What would your encouragement be to them?
Yeah. I mean, I'm probably going to sound like a broken record, but I think it really is that, like, I remember my wife and I often grappling with like, how do we even begin to move forward? Right. And it's strange to say, but there was a gift in going through it with someone else and to have a parallel kind of experience. And there's times when we both ask one another that question. And I think probably the number one thing was like, yeah, that's probably not on the table right now. Like having dream and I mean, that maybe sounds like really horrible, but like, it was so relieving to be like, Andrew, to hear from my wife, or to say to my wife, Callie, like, you're not responsible for the full scope of like humanness right now. Like we're just waking up and trying to get some food or experience the sun on your arm. To me, there's tremendous safety that comes with knowing what it used to look like to be a human. It doesn't look like that right now. It actually, the job description is like pretty dramatically changed. And I think that it reintroduces one of those first elements of safety in a really important way.
Totally. Absolutely. Well, maybe I could ask the question then, at this point in your life, I've heard you talk about being really like dreams light you up and helping people move towards their dreams. And you're building a new business and you're moving forward. And I'm wondering, what's your relationship now with your process, with your grief? Because you're obviously not in those beginning stages and you are moving towards more creativity, more building. So where are you in relation to the grief now? And does that hold you back, or are you friends with it, or what does that look like for you? Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that's a great way to put it. I think over time, the sensation of stinging, as like, it's characterized differently, I think, in my world. It's a mixture of good things. It's like, I don't even know that I'm like, am I friends with it? Not the fact that someone that I cared about died, like, absolutely not. And I know you're not saying that, but I'm like, there's permission for me to be like, oh yeah, totally. Like the thing. Yeah. No, that's the worst. What's come of it? Like, oh man, like I remember a counselor being like, there'll be times when you'll look at it years down the road and you'll be like, I'm thankful for this thing that came from that process. I think I can honestly say with like unequivocally that probably my favorite things about myself and my world and my relationships at this point have a tie to that process, and probably wouldn't be what they are without it. And so it's not like a positive spin. Like I said, like there's still tons to be like, well, that was really horrible. And it continues to be really horrible.
So you're not like wrapping bows on anything.
No, totally.
But you're still moving forward. Yeah. In more safety now than even a couple of years ago.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes so much sense. I mean, I feel like we could talk for another couple of hours about all of this stuff. And I love hearing from you and hearing your process. Thank you so much for everything that you shared.
Absolutely. Thanks for talking with me about it. It's really an honor and a pleasure.
Yeah. So just a couple more questions. First thing is, where can people find you if they want to work with you or want to read some of the stuff that you've written or whatever?
Absolutely. So my daughter's name is Olive. So the company that I started for coaching is called Wild Olive Coaching. So if you want to visit and read some of my writing, you can check out my website at wildolivecoaching.com. We have an Instagram, Wild Olive Coaching, and then I have a personal page as well that I kind of do writing from as well. That's AP Heiligenthal on Instagram. So I kind of write and just am doing videos and different things all across the board on those platforms. Yeah.
Amazing. Okay. And then the question that I ask every guest that I have on the show is, if you care to answer, what is something that you are currently healing or creating in your life?
Yep, absolutely. I think can I answer it with one thing that I think is both? So we moved about 16, 17 months ago. And so the healing is like, man, moving and transition like that is traumatic. We've been there for a long time. And I think I thought that the romantic images of like a plant going from one place being transplanted to another one would be great. Cause I'm like, the plant there's no blood when you move the plant. Like it's pretty clean. And for me, I'm like, oh no, it's painful. And there's grief and sadness and healing that's needed in leaving the attachments in one place. What it's led to is me building those in a new place here. And I think exploring what does it look like to share those with people. So it's me building friendships and connections and community and the creativity, I think, that is involved there. And I think also right alongside it, figuring out ways to share that with people that I'm coaching with in a number of different ways. So I'm excited for this year because I feel like there's a lot of possibility for that. And there's so much healing and learning that happens in kind of walking out that creative process.
Beautiful. Well, I hope that Nashville continues to just be such a beautiful community and a place of thriving for you, because they're so lucky to have you guys.
Oh my gosh. So kind. I'm lucky to have fall. Probably like you feel to have the palm trees again.
Yes, I do. I really do, actually. And moving it's a funny one. It's like so exciting, and it's surprising. It's surprising how much it really asks of your body. It's really, really tough.
It's crazy.
Well, thank you again. Thank you so much. I appreciate you so much, and I love talking, and this has been wonderful.
Likewise, thanks so much for having me, Courtney. Such an honor. So much appreciation and love for what you do.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thanks so much for listening. Bye.